Rodney Alcala, known as the dating game killer, was a sadistic serial killer who murdered at least 8 confirmed victims between 1968 and 1979, though authorities believe he may have killed as many as 130 people across the United States, using his skills as a photographer to lure young women and children into secluded locations where he would brutally rape, torture, and strangle them, often repeatedly bringing them to the brink of death before finally killing them in what prosecutors called an unequivocal carnage of violence that spanned over a decade. Born as Rodrigo Jacques Alcala Bucher on August 23, 1943, in San Antonio, Texas, Rodney came into this world as the third of 4 children to a Mexican-American couple, Raul Alcala Bucher and Ana Maria Gutierrez. The family was not wealthy, and young Rodney lived in a household that included his parents, 2 sisters, 1 brother, and his maternal grandmother. His older brother Raul had been born in 1941, followed by his older sister Marie-Therese in 1942, and later his youngest sister Marie-Christine would be born in 1947. In 1948, when Rodney was just 5 years old, he began his education at St. Joseph Catholic Elementary School before transferring to Mount Sacred Heart. The family lived a relatively normal life in Texas during these early years, but dramatic changes were coming that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of young Rodney's life. When Rodney was 8 years old in 1951, his maternal grandmother became seriously ill and expressed her desire to spend her final years in Mexico. The entire family made the difficult decision to move to Mexico to care for her, and it was there that Rodney attended his first non-Catholic school. The move to Mexico represented a significant disruption in the young boy's life, taking him away from everything familiar in Texas and plunging him into a new country, a new language environment, and a completely different way of life. Tragedy struck the family while they were living in Mexico. Rodney's beloved grandmother, the very reason they had made the move, passed away after they had been in the country for some time. The loss of his grandmother was devastating to the family, but an even more traumatic event was about to unfold that would leave lasting scars on young Rodney's psyche. In 1954, after 3 years of living in Mexico, Rodney's father Raul made a decision that would haunt the family forever. Unable to find steady work and apparently overwhelmed by the financial pressures of supporting his family, Raul abandoned his wife and children, leaving them destitute and homeless in a foreign country. 11-year-old Rodney suddenly found himself the oldest male in the household, thrust into the role of man of the house, at an age when he should have been playing and learning like any other child. The abandonment by his father was a catastrophic blow to Rodney's developing mind. Child psychologists now understand that parental abandonment, especially by the same-sex parent, can create profound feelings of guilt, shame, rejection, and fear in a child. Young Rodney was forced to grapple with questions that no child should have to face. Why did his father leave? Was it something he had done? Could he have prevented it? The emotional turmoil of these unanswered questions, combined with the sudden responsibility of helping his mother care for his sisters, created an unbearable psychological burden. Ana Maria, now a single mother with limited resources in a foreign country, made the difficult decision to return to the United States with her children. In 1954, she packed up what few belongings they had and moved the family to Los Angeles, California, where they would start over once again. Rodney was enrolled at St. Alphonsus in East Los Angeles, where he would attend school for the next 2 years. Despite the trauma he had endured, Rodney proved to be academically gifted and reasonably popular among his peers. His teachers noted that he was intelligent and capable, though some would later recall that there was something slightly different about him, something they could not quite put their finger on. He was supported by his family, particularly his mother, who worked tirelessly to provide for her children in their new country. In 1956, at the age of 13, Rodney finished 8th grade and enrolled at Cantwell Sacred Heart of Mary, a private Catholic high school. He continued to excel academically, but as he progressed through his teenage years, he began to rebel against the strict religious education he had been receiving since childhood. During his final semester of high school, Rodney made it clear to his family that he felt he had received enough religious instruction and insisted on transferring to a public school to complete his education. In 1960, Rodney graduated from Montebello High School as a 17-year-old with his entire life ahead of him. Those who knew him during his high school years described him as having many friends and dating frequently. He was known to enjoy playing the piano and was actively involved in yearbook planning. On the surface, he appeared to be a normal, well-adjusted teenager with a bright future. However, beneath this facade of normalcy, something dark was beginning to stir within Rodney's mind. The trauma of his father's abandonment, combined with the constant upheaval and instability of his early childhood, had planted seeds of dysfunction that were beginning to take root. Child development experts now recognize that the kind of abandonment trauma Rodney experienced can lead to serious psychological disorders, including antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic tendencies, and difficulties forming healthy relationships. On June 19, 1961, just after his 18th birthday, Rodney made a decision that seemed to offer him structure and purpose. He enlisted in the United States Army, entering a paratrooper program in North Carolina. The military seemed like it might provide the stability and father figure that had been missing from his life since his real father's abandonment. He served as a clerk and trained as a paratrooper, and for a while, it appeared that military life might be exactly what the young man needed. However, tragedy struck the family again on January 8, 1962, when Rodney was 19 years old. His father, Raul, who had abandoned them nearly 8 years earlier, unexpectedly passed away in Tulare County, California. Despite all the pain and trauma his father's abandonment had caused, the entire family attended the funeral. For Rodney, this meant facing the reality that he would never have the opportunity to confront his father about the abandonment, never get answers to the questions that had tormented him throughout his adolescence, and never receive the apology or explanation he desperately needed. The death of his father seemed to trigger something in Rodney's already fragile mental state. In 1963, while stationed at Fort Campbell on the Kentucky-Tennessee border, 20-year-old Private Alcala began exhibiting increasingly disturbing behavior. He went AWOL multiple times, showing a blatant disregard for military authority and discipline. During one of these unauthorized absences in June 1963, Rodney took what was supposed to be a routine weekend pass to Nashville, Tennessee. However, instead of returning to base as required, he stole a car and robbed another driver of their credit card before fleeing to New York City. His behavior in New York revealed the darkness that was growing within him. According to military reports, one night after leaving a bar in New York, Rodney saw a young woman walking down the street alone. Something inside him snapped. He began following her, and when the opportunity presented itself, he struck her with a Coke bottle in an unprovoked attack. Fortunately, the woman was able to escape, but this incident marked a first documented evidence of Rodney's violent tendencies toward women. After the attack, Rodney fled to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where he was eventually arrested by military authorities and charged with being absent without leave. While being transported back to Fort Campbell with a military escort, Rodney demonstrated the cunning and manipulative intelligence that would later serve him in his killing spree. As they changed trains in Atlanta, Georgia, he managed to escape from his military guards and flee to his family's home in California. When Rodney arrived unexpectedly at his mother's door, claiming he had hitchhiked nearly 3,000 miles from Fort Bragg, his family was shocked and concerned. His mother and sisters, still caring for him despite everything that had happened, advised him to turn himself into military authorities. However, during a stay at home, Rodney exhibited behavior that horrified his family. According to military reports, he exposed himself to his youngest sister, who became hysterical at his actions. When questioned about the incident later, Rodney admitted that he did not know if he wanted to have sexual relations with her. This disturbing behavior toward his own sister was a clear indication that Rodney's mental state was deteriorating rapidly. His family, already concerned about his increasingly erratic behavior, became genuinely frightened of what he might be capable of. Military psychiatric experts at the Army Hospital in Fort Ord, California, conducted a thorough evaluation of Rodney's mental condition. Their findings were deeply troubling. While they determined that he knew right from wrong, Indicating that he was not legally insane, they diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder, chronic and severe. The doctors concluded that he was totally unsuitable for further military duty and recommended his immediate discharge. In early 1964, at the age of 21, Rodney received a medical discharge from the U.S. Army following what was officially termed a nervous breakdown. The antisocial personality disorder diagnosis was significant because this condition is characterized by a pervasive pattern of disregard for the rights of others, lack of empathy, manipulative behavior, and often violent tendencies. Individuals with this disorder typically show no guilt or remorse for their actions and have great difficulty forming healthy relationships. After his discharge from the military, Rodney returned home to live with his mother while he attempted to get his life back on track. When he was released from the hospital, his family noted that he seemed to feel more like himself, but this apparent improvement would prove to be temporary and superficial. Despite his psychological issues, Rodney's intellectual gifts remained intact. He enrolled at the University of California, Los Angeles, specifically at the UCLA School of Fine Arts, where he began studying photography and other artistic disciplines. His professors noted that he was exceptionally talented and had a keen eye for composition and lighting. Photography became more than just an academic subject for Rodney. It became an obsession that would later play a crucial role in his criminal activities. During his time at UCLA, Rodney appeared to be a model student. He was articulate, charming, and capable of engaging in sophisticated conversations about art, photography, and culture. His classmates found him attractive and charismatic, and he had no difficulty making friends or attracting romantic partners. However, those who knew him best began to notice subtle signs that something was not quite right beneath his polished exterior. For 4 years, from 1964 to 1968, Rodney maintained this facade of normalcy. He excelled in his studies, developed his photography skills, and seemed to be building toward a successful career in the arts. But the psychological damage from his childhood trauma and his diagnosed personality disorder were like a time bomb ticking away inside his mind, waiting for the right trigger to set off an explosion of violence. That trigger came on September 25, 1968, when Rodney was 25 years old and had just completed his degree at UCLA. On that fateful day, a man named Donald Haynes was going about his daily routine when he witnessed something that disturbed him deeply. He saw a tall, attractive man with long dark hair approaching a small girl on Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood. The little girl was 8-year-old Tali Shapiro, who was walking to school that morning, just as she had done countless times before. She lived with her family at the iconic Chateau Marmont Hotel, less than a mile from where Rodney was now living. Tali was a bright, innocent child who had been taught to be polite to adults and to obey authority figures. Donald Haynes watched in growing alarm as Rodney approached the little girl. There was something about the man's behavior that set off every alarm bell in Haynes' mind. He was fixated on this little girl, Haynes would later recall. That disturbed me. The way Rodney was looking at Tali, the intensity of his focus on her, and his overall demeanor all screamed danger to the observant bystander. Rodney, using all the charm and manipulation skills he had perfected over the years, approached Tali with a friendly smile. When she initially showed hesitation, as she had been taught about not talking to strangers, Rodney smoothly lied to her, claiming that he knew her family. This deception was enough to overcome the little girl's natural caution. With the trusting nature of a child, Tali believed the handsome stranger's lie and allowed herself to be led to his car. Haynes, whose instincts were screaming that something was terribly wrong, made a decision that would save Tali's life. When he saw the little girl get into the back seat of Rodney's van, he immediately began following them. All the signs were there, Haynes would later say, describing how every detail of Rodney's behavior had indicated predatory intentions. Rodney drove Tali to his apartment, telling her that he was a professional photographer and wanted to show her a poster. The little girl, still trusting and unaware of the danger she was in, followed him into the apartment. He drove me to his house. I followed him in, and that's all I remember. There was nothing else to remember, Tali would later recall. He obviously hit me over the head right after that, and that was it. What happened next was an act of such brutality and depravity that it defied comprehension. Rodney savagely attacked the 8-year-old child, raping her and beating her with a metal bar with such violence that he nearly killed her. The attack was so severe that Tali suffered massive head trauma and required over 27 stitches in the back of her head. The innocent little girl who had been walking to school that morning was now fighting for her life. Meanwhile, Donald Haynes had called the police and reported what he had witnessed. Officers Chris Camacho and his partner responded to the call and rushed to Rodney's apartment. When they arrived and entered the premises, they discovered a scene of horror that would haunt them for the rest of their careers. They found 8-year-old Tali Shapiro lying unconscious on the floor in a massive pool of blood. She was naked, with the metal bar that had been used to beat her lying across her neck. She was barely clinging to life, groaning softly, which was the only indication to the officers that she was still alive. The apartment showed signs of the violent struggle that had taken place, with blood spattered on the walls and furniture. Rodney, however, was nowhere to be found. Hearing the police arrive, he had slipped out the back door of the apartment and fled, leaving his young victim to die. This ability to escape at the last moment, combined with his intelligence and manipulative skills, would become a recurring pattern in Rodney's criminal career. Tali was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. She remained in a coma for 32 days, and doctors were unsure whether she would survive or, if she did survive, whether she would suffer permanent brain damage from the severe head trauma. Her family maintained a constant vigil at her bedside, praying for her recovery and trying to come to terms with the fact that their innocent little girl had been subjected to such unthinkable violence. Miraculously, Tali did survive the attack and eventually made a full physical recovery, though the psychological trauma would affect her for years to come. She had no memory of the attack itself, which doctors explained was likely her mind's way of protecting itself from the horror of what had happened to her. The Los Angeles Police Department immediately launched a massive manhunt for Rodney Alcala. Detective Steve Hodel, who was investigating the case, spoke with neighbors and searched Rodney's apartment for clues. Among his belongings, they discovered a University of California at Los Angeles student ID, which helped them identify him as the primary suspect in the brutal attack on Tali Shapiro. However, Rodney had already put into motion an escape plan that demonstrated his cunning and intelligence. To evade the arrest warrant that he knew would be issued for him, Rodney fled California entirely and headed to the East Coast. Using forged documents and a false identity, he enrolled in New York University's School of the Arts undergraduate program under the alias John Berger. The choice of New York was strategic for several reasons. It was across the continent from California, making it much more difficult for law enforcement to track him down in the days before computerized databases and instant communication between police departments. Additionally, New York's large, anonymous urban environment provided the perfect place for someone to disappear and start a new life under a false identity. At NYU, Rodney enrolled in the film program and found himself studying under none other than Roman Polanski, the acclaimed director who would later become infamous for his own legal troubles. Polanski, not knowing anything about his student's violent past, found Rodney to be intelligent and talented, though he never completed his studies at the university. During his time in New York, Rodney worked to support himself while maintaining his false identity. He took a job as a photographer, building on the skills he had developed at UCLA. He also worked part-time as a security guard and camp counselor, jobs that gave him access to potential victims while maintaining the facade of being a respectable member of society. For 3 years, from 1968 to 1971, Rodney successfully evaded capture while living under his false identity in New York. To the outside world, John Berger appeared to be a talented young artist trying to make his way in the big city. He was charming, intelligent, and attractive, easily making friends and romantic connections. Few people suspected that behind his pleasant exterior lurked the mind of a violent predator. However, Rodney was not content to simply hide and live a quiet life under his assumed identity. The violent urges and psychological dysfunction that had driven him to attack Tali Shapiro had not been resolved. They had merely been suppressed. Like a cancer in remission, they were growing stronger beneath the surface, waiting for the right opportunity to emerge once again. In June 1971, while still living in New York under his false identity, Rodney encountered Cornelia Michelle Crilly, a 23-year-old flight attendant for Trans World Airlines. Cornelia was an attractive young woman who had moved to Manhattan to pursue her dreams of a career in aviation. She was living alone in her apartment, working hard to build her life in the competitive world of commercial aviation. The exact circumstances of how Rodney encountered Cornelia remain unclear, but investigators believe he may have posed as a photographer, as he often did when hunting for victims. Using his considerable charm and attractive appearance, he somehow gained access to her Manhattan apartment, possibly by offering to help her move furniture or by claiming he wanted to take her photograph for a professional portfolio. Once he had Cornelia alone and vulnerable, Rodney's true nature emerged with terrifying violence. He brutally raped the young flight attendant, bit her savagely, and then strangled her to death in her own apartment. The attack was characterized by the same extreme violence and sexual sadism that had marked his assault on Tali Shapiro, but this time there was no Donald Haynes to call police, and no chance for the victim to survive. The murder of Cornelia Crilly represented a significant escalation in Rodney's criminal behavior. While his attack on Tali Shapiro had been attempted murder, Cornelia's killing marked his first confirmed successful homicide. The psychological barriers that prevent most people from taking another person's life had been completely shattered in Rodney's mind. The NYPD investigated Cornelia's murder, but in 1971, New York City was experiencing an epidemic of violent crime, with nearly 2,000 homicides occurring that year alone. Without modern forensic techniques, DNA testing, or computerized databases, detectives had few leads to follow. The case of the murdered flight attendant was filed away with hundreds of other unsolved homicides, and Rodney continued living his double life under his false identity. Meanwhile, back in California, the FBI had not given up their search for the man who had brutally attacked Tali Shapiro. In early 1971, they added Rodney Alcala to their list of 10 most wanted fugitives, recognizing that he posed a serious ongoing threat to public safety. His photograph and description were distributed to police departments across the country, and wanted posters were displayed in post offices and other public buildings. It was this FBI wanted poster that would ultimately lead to Rodney's capture. In 1971, he had obtained a counseling job at a New Hampshire arts camp for children using yet another slightly modified alias, John Berger. The irony of a violent predator working with children while hiding under a false name was not lost on investigators who would later piece together his movements during this period. 2 children attending the arts camp happened to be in a post office when they noticed a wanted poster on the wall. The photograph on the FBI poster looked remarkably similar to their counselor, John Berger. The children, demonstrating exactly the kind of alertness and civic responsibility that adults hope to instill in young people, reported their suspicions to authorities. When FBI agents arrived at the camp to investigate, they quickly confirmed that John Berger was indeed Rodney Alcala, the fugitive they had been seeking for nearly 3 years. He was arrested and extradited back to California to face charges for the brutal attack on Tali Shapiro. However, the legal system in the early 1970s was very different from today, and Rodney's case highlighted the challenges of prosecuting violent crimes, especially when they involved child victims. By the time Rodney was brought to trial, Tali Shapiro's parents had made the heartbreaking decision to relocate their entire family to Mexico to escape the trauma and publicity surrounding the case. The Shapiro family's decision was understandable from a personal perspective. They wanted to protect their daughter from having to relive the trauma by testifying in court, and they hoped that moving to a new country would help Tali heal and put the nightmare behind her. However, their refusal to allow Tali to testify created a major problem for prosecutors. Without their primary witness and victim, the authorities were unwilling to pursue the full charges of rape and attempted murder that Rodney truly deserved. Instead, they were forced to accept a plea bargain in which Rodney pled guilty to the lesser charge of child molestation. This plea deal resulted in a sentence of only 3 years in prison, a shockingly lenient punishment for what had been an attempted murder of a child. The legal system's failure to adequately punish Rodney for his crimes against Tali Shapiro would have devastating consequences for his future victims. Instead of serving a lengthy prison sentence that might have prevented his later murders, Rodney was released on parole in 1974 after serving only 17 months of his 3-year sentence. He was also required to register as a sex offender, but this proved to be little more than a bureaucratic formality that did nothing to actually monitor or control his activities. Less than 2 months after his release from prison in 1974, Rodney demonstrated that his time behind bars had done nothing to address his violent tendencies or cure his psychological disorders. He abducted a 13-year-old girl identified in court records only as Julie J., who had accepted what she thought would be a ride to school from the friendly stranger. The attack on Julie J. followed the same pattern as his previous crimes. Rodney used his charm and manipulative abilities to gain the trust of his victim, then took her to an isolated location where he sexually assaulted her. However, this time he was caught before he could escalate to attempted murder, and the victim survived to testify against him. Despite this being his second conviction for crimes against children, the justice system once again failed to adequately protect society from Rodney's predatory behavior. He was charged only with providing marijuana to a minor and parole violation, charges that did not reflect the true severity of what he had done to Julie J. He was sentenced to serve 2 additional years in prison, which meant he would be free again in 1976. During his second stint in prison, Rodney had plenty of time to think about his past crimes and plan for his future. Rather than using this time for genuine rehabilitation or reflection on the harm he had caused his victims, he appears to have spent the time perfecting his manipulative techniques and developing more sophisticated methods for hunting and capturing victims. When Rodney was released on parole for the second time in 1976, his parole officer in Los Angeles made a decision that would prove to be tragically misguided. The officer granted Rodney permission to travel to New York City to visit relatives, apparently not considering the danger this posed to the public or the possibility that Rodney might use the trip as an opportunity to commit more crimes. In July 1977, while supposedly visiting relatives in New York, Rodney encountered Ellen Jane Hover, a 23-year-old aspiring music conductor who came from a prominent New York family. Ellen's father was a well-known nightclub owner, and she had grown up in an environment of wealth and privilege that made her somewhat naive about the dangers that could lurk behind a charming smile. Ellen had recently graduated from college and was pursuing her dream of becoming a professional music conductor, a challenging field for women in the 1970s. She was intelligent, talented, and determined to make her mark in the competitive world of classical music. She lived alone in Manhattan, working to establish herself professionally while enjoying the cultural opportunities that New York City offered. Rodney, now an experienced predator with nearly a decade of criminal activity behind him, had perfected his techniques for approaching and manipulating potential victims. He likely posed as a photographer, as this had proven to be an effective method for gaining trust and access to young women. His UCLA education and genuine artistic knowledge made his photographer persona completely believable. On July 15, 1977, Ellen left her Manhattan apartment for what she believed would be a routine day. She may have been meeting with Rodney for what she thought was a legitimate photography session, or she may have encountered him by chance and been drawn in by his charm and apparent sophistication. Whatever the exact circumstances, she was never seen alive again. Rodney abducted Ellen and took her to a remote area on the grounds of the Rockefeller Estate in Westchester County, a location he had apparently scouted in advance as a place where he could commit his crimes without being interrupted. This choice of location demonstrated both his intelligence in planning his attacks and his familiarity with the New York area from his years of living there under false identities. At the isolated location on the Rockefeller Estate, Rodney subjected Ellen to the same kind of brutal sexual assault and torture that had characterized his previous attacks. However, this time there would be no survival and no chance of rescue. He murdered the young woman and left her body in the secluded area, confident that it would not be discovered for a long time. Ellen's remains were found approximately 1 year later by someone walking in the area near the Rockefeller Estate. By then, decomposition and the passage of time had eliminated most of the physical evidence that might have linked Rodney to the crime. The case was investigated as a homicide, but without witnesses, forensic evidence, or any apparent connection to Rodney. It joined the growing list of unsolved murders that he had committed. After murdering Ellen Hover, Rodney returned to California and resumed his life there, apparently believing that he had successfully gotten away with another killing. However, the murder of Ellen Hover had marked a significant escalation in his criminal behavior. He had now progressed from attempted murder to successful homicide, and the psychological gratification he derived from these acts of ultimate violence would drive him to kill again and again. Back in California, Rodney found legitimate work as a typesetter for the Los Angeles Times newspaper. This job provided him with both income and a veneer of respectability, while also giving him access to information about police investigations and criminal cases through his work with news content. The position was ideal for a criminal who needed to stay informed about law enforcement activities while maintaining his cover as a law-abiding citizen. Rodney's job at the Los Angeles Times also put him in contact with many people throughout the newspaper industry and the broader Los Angeles media community. His intelligence, charm, and artistic background made him popular among his colleagues, many of whom had no idea that they were working alongside one of the most dangerous predators in the country. By 1977, Rodney had settled into what appeared to be a stable routine in Los Angeles. He had steady employment, was building a network of professional contacts, and seemed to be successfully reintegrating into society after his prison sentences. However, beneath this facade of normalcy, he was actively hunting for new victims and planning his next attacks. On November 10, 1977, Rodney encountered Jill Barkham, an 18-year-old aspiring actress who had recently moved to Los Angeles from New York with dreams of making it in Hollywood. Like thousands of other young women who came to Los Angeles each year hoping to break into the entertainment industry, Jill was beautiful, talented, and optimistic about her future. Jill had come to California with the same hopes and dreams that had drawn countless others to Hollywood over the decades. She wanted to use her beauty and talent to build a career in movies or television, and she was willing to work hard and take risks to achieve her goals. Unfortunately, her youth and inexperience made her vulnerable to predators like Rodney, who specifically targeted women in her situation. Rodney, now 34 years old and an experienced killer, had learned exactly how to approach young women like Jill. He likely posed as a photographer or someone connected to the entertainment industry, offering to help her career by taking professional photographs or promising to introduce her to important contacts in Hollywood. This type of approach was particularly effective with aspiring actresses who were eager for any opportunity to advance their careers. Once Rodney had gained Jill's trust and lured her to an isolated location, he revealed his true intentions. He brutally sexually assaulted the young woman, then killed her using methods that prosecutor Matt Murphy would later describe as involving multiple ligatures and having her face smashed in with a rock. The level of violence was extreme even by the standards of Rodney's previous crimes. After murdering Jill, Rodney disposed of her body on a remote road in the Hollywood Hills, where it was discovered by someone passing by. The location was isolated enough that the crime scene had not been contaminated by other people, but it was accessible enough that the body would eventually be found. This choice of dump site suggested that Rodney wanted his victims to be discovered, possibly because he derived some psychological satisfaction from the fear and media attention his crimes generated. The murder of Jill Barkham devastated her family, who had supported her dreams and had been proud of her courage in pursuing a career in Hollywood. Her brother Bruce Barkham would later speak at Rodney's sentencing hearing, describing the impact her death had on everyone who loved her. There is murder and rape, and then there is the unequivocal carnage of a Rodney Alcala-style murder, he said, trying to convey the extreme nature of the violence that had taken his sister's life. Less than a month after killing Jill Barkham, Rodney struck again, demonstrating that he had now entered a phase of his criminal career where he was killing with increasing frequency and decreasing time between attacks. His next victim was Georgia Wickstead, a 27-year-old pediatric cancer nurse who had dedicated her life to caring for sick children. Georgia was the kind of person who represented everything good and decent in society. She had chosen one of the most challenging and emotionally demanding careers in medicine, working with children who were fighting for their lives against cancer. Her colleagues and patients' families described her as incredibly compassionate, skilled, and dedicated to helping others. She had recently moved into her own apartment in Los Angeles and was building what should have been a long and fulfilling career in nursing. Rodney's method of approaching Georgia followed his established pattern of using deception and manipulation to gain access to his victims. He may have posed as someone needing medical advice or assistance, or he may have used his photographer persona to approach her. Given Georgia's caring nature and professional background, she would have been particularly susceptible to someone who seemed to need help or who presented a professional opportunity. Once Rodney had Georgia alone in her apartment, he He subjected her to the same kind of extreme violence that had characterized his other attacks. Prosecutor Matt Murphy later described Georgia as a super sweet person whose murder was particularly heinous because of the torture and sexual assault that preceded her death. She was found dead in her apartment, having been brutally beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled. The murder of Georgia Wickstead represented not just the loss of a life, but the loss of all the future patients she would have cared for and all the families she would have helped during their most difficult times. The ripple effects of Rodney's violence extended far beyond his immediate victims to include all the people whose lives would have been touched by their kindness and contributions to society. By early 1978, Rodney had now killed at least 4 people in California and New York, but his crimes had not yet been connected by law enforcement. The lack of modern forensic techniques, computerized databases, and communication between different police departments meant that each murder was being investigated as an isolated incident. Rodney's intelligence and careful planning had allowed him to avoid detection while building an increasingly horrific trail of violence. In 1978, Rodney encountered Charlotte Lamb, a 32-year-old legal secretary who had also come to California with dreams of building a better life for herself. Charlotte was described by those who knew her as strikingly beautiful and ambitious, with hopes of using her legal career as a stepping stone to greater opportunities in Los Angeles. Charlotte worked in the legal profession, which required intelligence, attention to detail, and strong professional skills. She was independent, capable, and successful in her career, representing the type of strong, accomplished woman that Rodney seemed to particularly target. Her life was full of promise and potential when she encountered the charming stranger who would end it all. On the night she was killed, Charlotte had gone to a bar in Santa Monica, probably looking to unwind after a long day at work and perhaps meet new people in the social environment of Los Angeles nightlife. It was there that she most likely encountered Rodney, who by now had perfected his ability to present himself as an attractive, sophisticated man who could offer interesting conversation and apparent opportunities. Rodney likely used his standard approach of claiming to be a photographer or someone connected to the entertainment industry. Charlotte, like many women in Los Angeles, may have been interested in the possibility of modeling or acting as a sideline to her legal career. Whatever specific lies Rodney told her, they were effective enough to convince Charlotte to leave the bar with him. Charlotte was found murdered in the laundry room of an El Segundo apartment complex, having been sexually assaulted, tortured, and strangled to death. The choice of the laundry room as a crime scene suggested that Rodney had either lured her there under some pretext or had abducted her from elsewhere and brought her to this isolated location within the apartment complex. The discovery of Charlotte's body in the apartment complex laundry room was particularly disturbing for the residents, who realized that such extreme violence had occurred in their supposedly safe residential environment. The randomness of the attack and the brutality of the murder created a climate of fear throughout the community. By 1979, Rodney's killing spree was escalating both in frequency and in the level of violence he was inflicting on his victims. His next victim was 21-year-old Jill Parento, a computer programmer who lived in Burbank and represented the new generation of women who were entering previously male-dominated technical fields. Jill Parento was intelligent, independent, and successful in her chosen career at a time when computer programming was still a relatively new and specialized field. She had worked hard to establish herself professionally and was building what should have been a bright future in the rapidly expanding world of computer technology. The attack on Jill followed the same pattern as Rodney's previous murders. He somehow gained access to her Burbank apartment, where he brutally sexually assaulted her, beat her, and strangled her to death. In a particularly disturbing detail that revealed the depth of his psychological dysfunction, Rodney posed Jill's nude body after killing her, suggesting that he derived some sort of artistic or aesthetic satisfaction from arranging his victims' corpses. The murder of Jill Parento was devastating to her family, particularly her sister Didi Parento, who would later speak at Rodney's trial about the impact the loss had on their family. "It's been very devastating for my family," she said. "She was kind and gentle, full, and with wonderful sense of humor." The description painted a picture of yet another promising life cut short by Rodney's violence. During this same period in 1978, while he was actively committing murders throughout California, Rodney did something that would later become one of the most infamous aspects of his criminal career. He applied to be a contestant on The Dating Game, a popular television show where 3 eligible bachelors competed to win a date with a bachelorette. The Dating Game was a lighthearted entertainment program that had been running since the mid-1960s. The format involved a bachelorette asking questions of 3 hidden bachelors, then choosing one of them for a date based on their answers. The show was known for its sexual innuendo and playful atmosphere, and appearing as a contestant was considered both fun and potentially beneficial for one's social life. What makes Rodney's appearance on The Dating Game so shocking in retrospect is that by the time he applied to be a contestant, he had already murdered at least 5 people and had served prison time for sexual assault of children. He was a registered sex offender and had been on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. However, the show's producers did not conduct thorough background checks on their contestants, a practice that seems almost unimaginable by today's standards. The producers of The Dating Game, Mike and Ellen Metzger, had different reactions to Rodney during his audition process. Mike Metzger later recalled feeling uncomfortable about Rodney, sensing something unsettling about him that he could not quite identify. However, Ellen Metzger found him charming and attractive, and ultimately the decision was made to accept him as a contestant. Rodney's appearance on The Dating Game took place in 1978, and he was introduced by host Jim Lang as Bachelor Number 1, described as a successful photographer who got his start when his father found him in the darkroom at the age of 13, fully developed. The introduction was filled with a kind of sexual double entendre that was typical of the show, but it took on a much more sinister meaning given what the audience did not know about Rodney's true nature. During the show, Rodney enthusiastically responded to the Bachelorette's suggestive questions with answers that, in hindsight, seemed deeply disturbing. He compared himself to a banana, said that nighttime was when he really gets good, and acted out the part of what the show described as a dirty old man. At the time, these responses seemed like typical dating game banter, but knowing what we now know about Rodney's crimes, they take on a much more ominous significance. The Bachelorette on that episode was Cheryl Bradshaw, an aspiring actress and teacher who was looking for romance and perhaps some exposure that might help her career. Based purely on the contestants' answers to her questions, she chose Rodney as the winner, which meant they would go on a date together sponsored by the show. However, after the show was over and Cheryl met Rodney backstage, her instincts immediately told her that something was wrong. She later described feeling weird vibes coming from him and told the show's contestant coordinator, Ellen Metzger, "I can't go out with this guy. There's weird vibes that are coming off of him. He's very strange. I am not comfortable." Cheryl Bradshaw's decision to trust her instincts and refuse the date may have saved her life. Her intuitive recognition that something was dangerous about Rodney, despite his charming exterior and the fun atmosphere of the show, demonstrated the importance of listening to one's gut feelings about people, even in seemingly safe social situations. Rodney's appearance on The Dating Game would later earn him the nickname, the Dating Game Killer, but at the time, his rejection by Cheryl Bradshaw probably frustrated and angered him. For someone with his narcissistic personality disorder and need for control, being rejected by a woman on national television was likely a significant blow to his ego that may have contributed to the escalation of his violent behavior. Just 1 month after his Dating Game appearance, Rodney committed what would become his final and most infamous murder. On June 20th, 1979, he approached 12-year-old Robin Samso, a ballet student from Huntington Beach, California, who was on her way to dance class when she encountered the friendly stranger who offered to take her picture. Robin Samso was described by everyone who knew her as a precocious, talented, and beloved child who brought joy to everyone around her. She was passionate about ballet and had been taking lessons for years, showing real talent and dedication to her art. As the youngest child in her family, she was doted on by her parents, brother, and sister, who saw her as the bright light of their household. On that fateful day in June, Robin was riding her bicycle to her ballet class, as she had done many times before. She was in familiar surroundings, following a routine that had always been safe, when she encountered Rodney, who was now an experienced predator with nearly 11 years of criminal activity behind him. Rodney approached Robin using his well-practiced photographer persona, probably complimenting her appearance and offering to take professional photographs that could help launch a modeling or acting career. For a young girl interested in dance and performance, the opportunity to have professional photos taken would have seemed exciting and legitimate. What happened next represented every parent's worst nightmare. Robin was never seen alive again after accepting Rodney's offer to photograph her. Her family reported her missing when she failed to return from ballet class, and a massive search effort was launched throughout the Huntington Beach area. 12 days after Robin's disappearance, her remains were found in a remote location in the San Gabriel Mountains, approximately 40 miles from where she was last seen alive. The discovery of her body revealed the full extent of Rodney's depravity and violence. According to prosecutor Gina Satriano, Robin's head was separated from the rest of her body. Both her hands were missing, her front teeth were cracked, indicating that the child had been subjected to extreme torture before being murdered. The murder of Robin Samsoe represented a new level of brutality in Rodney's crimes. While his previous victims had been teenagers and young adults, Robin was just a child, making the crime even more heinous and shocking to the community. The extreme mutilation of her body suggested that Rodney's psychological condition was deteriorating and his violence was becoming even more sadistic. The investigation into Robin's murder was intense and thorough, involving multiple law enforcement agencies and extensive forensic analysis. Unlike his previous crimes, this murder provided investigators with more physical evidence and witness testimony that would eventually lead to Rodney's arrest. During the investigation, police discovered that Rodney had been seen talking to Robin and her friend at the beach on the day of her disappearance. Robin's friend was able to provide a description of the man who had approached them, and this description matched other witness accounts of someone suspicious in the area around the time Robin went missing. The breakthrough in the case came when investigators traced various pieces of evidence back to Rodney, including testimony from witnesses who had seen him with Robin and forensic evidence that connected him to the crime. In July 1979, approximately 1 month after Robin's murder, Rodney was arrested and charged with her kidnapping and murder. At the time of his arrest, investigators also discovered that Rodney had rented a storage locker in Seattle, Washington, where he had moved after Robin's murder. When they obtained a warrant to search the locker, they made a discovery that revealed the full scope of his criminal activities and provided crucial evidence linking him to other murders. The storage locker contained what prosecutors would later describe as Rodney's trophies from his various crimes. Among the items found were earrings that belonged to Robin Samsoe, providing physical evidence connecting Rodney to her murder. Also found in the locker were earrings belonging to Charlotte Lamb, linking him to that murder as well. Perhaps most disturbing of all were the hundreds of photographs that Rodney had stored in the locker. These images showed women, teenage girls, and boys, many in sexually explicit poses. Some of the photographs appeared to have been taken without the subject's knowledge or consent, while others showed people who appeared to be posing willingly, but may not have understood the true purpose of the photography session. The photographs represented a chilling record of Rodney's predatory behavior over many years. Investigators realized that these images potentially documented hundreds of encounters with possible victims, many of whom had never been identified or reported missing. The photographs became crucial evidence in understanding the full extent of Rodney's crimes and in potentially identifying other victims. In 1980, Rodney went on trial for the murder of Robin Samsoe in what would become the first of 3 separate trials for the same crime. The prosecution presented a strong case that included witness testimony, physical evidence from the storage locker, and forensic evidence linking Rodney to the murder. Despite his intelligence and attempts to manipulate the legal proceedings, he was convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances that made him eligible for the death penalty. The jury that convicted Rodney also heard testimony during the penalty phase of the trial from some of his surviving victims and from the families of those he had murdered. The emotional impact of these testimonies was profound, as family members described the devastating effect that Rodney's crimes had on their lives. Tali Shapiro, now an adult, bravely testified about the attack she had survived as an 8-year-old child. Despite having no memory of the attack itself, she was able to describe the lasting impact it had on her life and her family. Her testimony was particularly powerful because it demonstrated that even his failed attempts at murder had caused lifelong trauma to his victims. During the penalty phase, Rodney made the shocking decision to represent himself, cross-examining his own victims and attempting to manipulate the proceedings. When he questioned Tali Shapiro, he offered what seemed like an apology, saying, "I sincerely regret what happened. I apologize for my despicable behavior." However, this apparent remorse was widely viewed as another manipulation tactic rather than genuine regret. The jury ultimately recommended the death penalty for Rodney, and in 1980, he was sentenced to death for the murder of Robin Sanso. However, this would not be the end of his legal proceedings. The complex nature of death penalty cases and the appeals process meant that Rodney would spend decades fighting his conviction and sentence. In 1984, the California Supreme Court overturned Rodney's conviction and death sentence, ruling that there had been errors in the trial proceedings. This decision meant that he would have to be retried for Robin's murder, giving him another opportunity to escape justice for his crimes. The second trial took place in 1986, and once again, Rodney was convicted of Robin's murder and sentenced to death. However, the legal system's handling of his case continued to be problematic. In 2003, a federal appeals court overturned his second conviction and death sentence, ruling that there had been prosecutorial misconduct during the trial. This meant that Rodney would face a third trial for the same murder. During the years between his second and third trials, advances in forensic science, particularly DNA testing, provided investigators with new tools for linking Rodney to his other crimes. DNA evidence collected from the crime scenes of his previous murders could now be tested and compared to samples from Rodney, providing scientific proof of his involvement in cases that had remained unsolved for decades. In 2006, prosecutors added 4 additional murder charges to Rodney's case, connecting him to the murders of Jill Barkham, Georgia Wickstead, Charlotte Lamb, and Jill Parento through DNA evidence and other forensic techniques that had not been available during his previous trials. This meant that when he went to trial for the third time in 2010, he would be facing charges for 5 murders rather than just Robin's death. The third trial, which took place in 2010, was a media sensation that brought renewed attention to Rodney's crimes and their impact on his victims' families. By this time, he was 66 years old and had spent over 30 years in the legal system, but he remained as manipulative and narcissistic as ever. During the 2010 trial, Rodney once again chose to represent himself, a decision that allowed him to cross-examine witnesses and essentially put on a performance for the court and media. This self-representation was widely viewed as another example of his narcissistic personality and his desire to maintain control over the proceedings. One of the most bizarre moments of the third trial came when Rodney played a seconds-long clip of his appearance on the dating game as part of his defense. He claimed that the grainy footage proved he was wearing a gold ball earring almost a year before Robin was killed, somehow attempting to use his television appearance to create reasonable doubt about his guilt. The absurdity of this defense strategy highlighted both his desperation and his continued inability to accept responsibility for his crimes. The prosecution in the 2010 trial presented overwhelming evidence of Rodney's guilt, including DNA evidence, witness testimony, physical evidence from his storage locker, and detailed analysis of his methods and patterns of behavior. The case against him was so strong that there was little doubt about the outcome. On February 25, 2010, the jury found Rodney guilty on 5 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, making him eligible for the death penalty once again. The special circumstances included rape, torture, and kidnapping, reflecting the extreme nature of his crimes and the suffering he had inflicted on his victims. 3 weeks later, the same jury recommended the death penalty for Rodney, and on March 30, 2010, Orange County Superior Court Judge Francisco Briceño sentenced him to death for the 3rd time. During the sentencing hearing, Judge Briceño told Rodney that his actions warranted the ultimate punishment, siding with the jury's recommendation for execution. The sentencing hearing provided an opportunity for the families of Rodney's victims to finally confront him and express the impact his crimes had on their lives. The emotional testimony from family members was heartbreaking, as they described not only the loss of their loved ones but also the decades of pain and uncertainty they had endured while waiting for justice. Bruce Barkham, whose sister Jill had been Rodney's first California victim, delivered particularly powerful testimony during the sentencing phase. "There is murder and rape, and then there is the unequivocal carnage of a Rodney Alcala-style murder," he said, trying to convey to the court the extreme nature of the violence that had taken his sister's life. He also directly addressed Rodney, saying, "Give up your debt, Rodney. All victims, all states, all occurrences. Own your truth." Even after his third death sentence, Rodney's legal case was not completely resolved. In 2012, he was extradited to New York to face charges for the murders of Cornelia Crilly and Ellen Jane Hover, the two women he had killed during his years of hiding under false identities in the 1970s. The New York charges were possible because of advances in DNA testing that had allowed investigators to match saliva found on Cornelia Crilly's body to Rodney's genetic profile. Additionally, forensic odontologists were able to match bite marks found on Cornelia's body to molds of Rodney's teeth, providing multiple forms of scientific evidence linking him to the crime. Rather than face another lengthy trial, Rodney chose to plead guilty to the New York murders in 2012. He was sentenced to an additional 25 years to life in prison, ensuring that even if his California death sentences were somehow overturned again, he would remain in prison for the rest of his life. In 2016, prosecutors in Wyoming filed charges against Rodney for the murder of Christine Ruth Thornton, a 28-year-old pregnant woman who had disappeared in 1978. Christine had been 6 months pregnant when she vanished, making her murder particularly heinous. Her remains were not discovered until 1982, and she was not identified until 2015 through DNA testing. The Wyoming case was significant because it demonstrated that Rodney's crimes had extended beyond California and New York to include victims in other states. However, by 2016, Rodney was in poor health and confined to a wheelchair, and prosecutors eventually determined that he was too ill to be extradited to Wyoming to face the charges. Throughout his decades in prison, investigators continued to work on identifying the people in the hundreds of photographs found in Rodney's storage locker. In 2010, after his third conviction, the Huntington Beach Police Department released more than 100 of these photographs to the public, hoping that someone would recognize the subjects and help determine whether they had been victims of additional crimes. The release of the photographs generated hundreds of phone calls from people who thought they recognized someone in the images. Most of the individuals who were identified turned out to be alive and well, having been photographed by Rodney during legitimate photography sessions or casual encounters. However, investigators remained concerned that some of the unidentified subjects might have been victims of crimes that were never reported or discovered. The investigation into Rodney's photographs also led to the identification of Christine Ruth Thornton in Wyoming. A relative who had been searching for Christine since her disappearance in 1977 was looking through the released photographs in 2013 when they recognized her. This led to DNA testing that confirmed the identification and ultimately resulted in the murder charges filed in Wyoming. Psychological experts who studied Rodney's case identified several factors that contributed to his development into a serial killer. His abandonment by his father at age 11 created deep psychological wounds that were never properly addressed. The instability and trauma of his early childhood, combined with his diagnosed antisocial personality disorder, created a perfect storm of psychological dysfunction. Dr. Damien Sendler, a clinical sexologist who studied Rodney's pathological behaviors, identified 3 significant events that shaped him in negative ways: his childhood abandonment and constant moving, his medical discharge from the Army due to mental breakdown, and his failure to complete his artistic education despite his obvious intelligence and talent. These experiences of rejection and failure contributed to his sense that people did not understand him or appreciate his abilities. Rodney's use of photography as a tool for luring victims was particularly significant from a psychological perspective. Dr. Sendler explained that Rodney felt his artistic talents were not properly recognized or appreciated, so he decided to force people into his art space by making the human body a piece of his art through violence and murder. The extreme nature of Rodney's violence also reflected deep psychological disturbance. Prosecutors described how he would toy with his victims, strangling them until they lost consciousness, then waiting for them to revive before repeating the process multiple times. This pattern of behavior indicated that he derived psychological gratification not just from killing, but from the process of controlling and terrorizing his victims. One detective described Rodney as a killing machine, while others compare him to Ted Bundy in terms of his intelligence, charm, and ability to manipulate people. However, Rodney's crimes were arguably even more sadistic than Bundy's, involving extreme torture and mutilation that went beyond what was necessary to kill his victims. Throughout his decades in prison, Rodney never showed genuine remorse for his crimes or accepted responsibility for the pain he had caused. He continued to file lawsuits and appeals, claiming that his rights were being violated and that he deserved better treatment. He even filed lawsuits over minor issues like a slip-and-fall incident and complaints about the prison diet, demonstrating his continued narcissistic focus on his own concerns rather than those of his victims. During his imprisonment, Rodney also wrote a book titled You, the Jury, in which he continued to maintain his innocence and present his version of events. The book was seen by many as another manipulation tactic, attempting to convince people that he had been wrongly convicted despite the overwhelming evidence against him. As Rodney aged in prison, his health began to decline significantly. He was confined to a wheelchair and suffered from various medical conditions that made it increasingly unlikely that he would ever be executed. California had also imposed a moratorium on executions during Governor Gavin Newsom's administration, meaning that even if Rodney's health had permitted it, his death sentence probably would not have been carried out. On July 24, 2021, at 1:43 a.m., Rodney James Alcala died of natural causes at a hospital in Kings County, California, at the age of 77. He had been on California's death row for over 40 years, making him one of the longest-serving inmates in the state's correctional system. The news of Rodney's death brought mixed reactions from his survivors and the families of his victims. Tali Shapiro, who had survived his attack when she was 8 years old, expressed relief at his passing, saying, "The world is a better place without him, that's for sure." For many of those affected by his crimes, his death represented the final closing of a chapter that had dominated their lives for decades. However, Rodney's death also meant that many questions about his crimes would never be answered. He had never fully confessed to all of his murders or provided information about other potential victims. Investigators believe that he may have been responsible for as many as 130 murders across multiple states, but without his cooperation, many of these cases will likely remain unsolved forever. The case of Rodney Alcala serves as a stark reminder of the importance of thorough background checks, the need for effective monitoring of convicted sex offenders, and the critical role that intuition and awareness can play in personal safety. Cheryl Bradshaw's decision to trust her instincts and refuse to go on a date with him after the dating game may have saved her life, while the alertness of Donald Haynes in calling police when he saw Rodney approaching Tali Shapiro certainly saved the little girl's life. The failures of the justice system in Rodney's case also highlight the importance of adequate sentencing for violent crimes and the need for effective rehabilitation programs for offenders with serious psychological disorders. His early releases from prison after relatively short sentences for violent crimes against children directly contributed to his ability to commit multiple murders. The investigation of Rodney's crimes also demonstrates the importance of advances in forensic science, particularly DNA testing, in solving cold cases and connecting crimes that might otherwise remain isolated incidents. Without DNA evidence, he might never have been connected to many of his murders, and justice for his victims might never have been achieved. For the families of Rodney's victims, his death marked the end of a decades-long ordeal of trials, appeals, and legal proceedings. While they could never bring back their loved ones, they could finally have the certainty that he would never hurt anyone else, and that the legal system had ultimately held him accountable for his crimes. The legacy of Rodney Alcala's crimes extends beyond his immediate victims to include all the people whose lives were touched by his violence. The families who lost loved ones, the survivors who carried physical and emotional scars for decades, the investigators who dedicated years of their careers to bringing him to justice, and the communities that lived in fear during his killing spree were all affected by his actions. His story also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of superficial charm and the importance of looking beyond appearances when evaluating people's character. Rodney was intelligent, attractive, and capable of presenting himself as a cultured, artistic individual, but beneath this exterior lurked one of the most dangerous predators in American criminal history. The photographs found in Rodney's storage locker remain a haunting reminder of the full scope of his predatory behavior. While most of the identified subjects turned out to be survivors of photography sessions rather than murder victims, The images serve as evidence of the systematic way he approached and documented his interactions with potential victims over many years. The impact of Rodney's crimes on law enforcement practices has been significant. His case contributed to improvements in background check procedures for television shows and other public forums, better communication between police departments in different jurisdictions, and enhanced methods for tracking and monitoring convicted sex offenders. His use of photography as a tool for approaching victims also led to increased awareness about the tactics used by predators and the importance of verifying the credentials of anyone offering professional photography services, particularly to young people interested in modeling or acting careers. The extreme violence and sadistic nature of Rodney's crimes also contributed to research into the psychology of serial killers and the development of better methods for identifying and treating individuals with severe personality disorders before they escalate to violence. For criminologists and psychologists studying serial murder, Rodney's case provides valuable insights into the development and progression of a career criminal. His crimes showed clear escalation over time, from attempted murder to successful killing, from targeting adults to including children, and from relatively quick killings to prolonged torture and mutilation. The role of childhood trauma in Rodney's development into a killer has also been extensively studied. His case supports the growing understanding that severe abandonment trauma, particularly during critical developmental periods, can contribute to the development of antisocial personality disorders and violent behavior patterns. However, experts also emphasize that while childhood trauma may be a contributing factor in the development of violent criminals, it is not an excuse for their actions or a guarantee that trauma survivors will become violent. Millions of people experience childhood abandonment and trauma without becoming serial killers, highlighting the complex interaction of genetic, psychological, and social factors that contribute to criminal behavior. The media attention surrounding Rodney's case, particularly his appearance on The Dating Game, has also contributed to popular understanding of serial killers and the ways they can hide in plain sight within normal society. His television appearance has become one of the most famous examples of how dangerous criminals can successfully present themselves as ordinary, even appealing individuals. The case has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, television shows, and most recently, the Netflix film, Woman of the Hour, directed by and starring Anna Kendrick. These media portrayals have helped keep the memory of his victims alive while also educating the public about the warning signs of predatory behavior. For the field of victim services, Rodney's case has highlighted the importance of providing long-term support for survivors of violent crimes and the families of murder victims. The decades-long legal proceedings in his case meant that those affected by his crimes had to relive their trauma repeatedly through trials, appeals, and media coverage. The case also demonstrated the importance of protecting child victims during legal proceedings. The Shapiro family's decision to move to Mexico to avoid having Tolly testify was understandable from a personal perspective, but it also allowed Rodney to receive a much lighter sentence than his crimes warranted, contributing to his ability to commit future murders. Modern victim services and legal procedures have evolved to better protect child witnesses, while still allowing for effective prosecution of crimes against children. These improvements were influenced, in part, by cases like Rodney's, where the failure to adequately protect child victims had devastating consequences for public safety. The international aspects of Rodney's case, including his family's time in Mexico and his crimes in multiple U.S. states, also highlighted the challenges of investigating and prosecuting crimes that cross jurisdictional boundaries. His case contributed to improvements in communication and cooperation between law enforcement agencies at different levels of government. The storage locker full of photographs that Rodney maintained also influenced law enforcement practices regarding the collection and analysis of evidence in serial crime cases. The systematic way he documented his interactions with potential victims provided investigators with unprecedented insight into the mind and methods of a serial predator. The public release of some of these photographs, while controversial from a privacy standpoint, demonstrated the value of community involvement in identifying victims and solving cold cases. The hundreds of phone calls generated by the photo release showed how public participation can be a valuable tool in criminal investigations. For the families of Rodney's victims, the decades-long legal proceedings meant that they never had the opportunity to fully grieve and move on with their lives. Each new trial, appeal, or legal development forced them to relive the trauma of their losses and confront the man who had destroyed their families. The impact on the survivors, particularly Tali Shapiro and Morgan Rowan, was also profound. Both women had to live with the knowledge that they had survived attacks by one of the most dangerous serial killers in American history. Their ability to rebuild their lives and eventually speak publicly about their experiences demonstrated remarkable courage and resilience. The friendship that developed between Tali and Morgan after they connected through social media decades later showed how survivors can find strength and healing through connecting with others who have shared similar traumatic experiences. Their mutual support and advocacy work have helped other survivors and contributed to public understanding of the long-term effects of violent crime. The case also highlighted the importance of bystander intervention in preventing crimes. Donald Haynes' decision to follow Rodney and call police when he saw him approaching Tali Shapiro directly saved the little girl's life and led to Rodney's first arrest. His actions demonstrated how ordinary citizens can play a crucial role in public safety by trusting their instincts and taking action when they witness suspicious behavior. Similarly, the children at the New Hampshire Arts Camp who recognized Rodney's photograph on an FBI wanted poster and reported it to authorities showed how community awareness and civic responsibility can help law enforcement capture dangerous criminals. The failure of the Dating Games production team to conduct thorough background checks on contestants became a watershed moment for the entertainment industry. The show's producers' admission that they felt uncomfortable about Rodney but still allowed him to participate highlighted the importance of trusting professional instincts and implementing proper safety procedures. Modern television and film productions now routinely conduct extensive background checks on participants, influenced in part by the recognition that failure to do so can put both other participants and the general public at risk. Rodney's case became a cautionary tale about the responsibility that media companies have for public safety. The psychological profile that emerged from Rodney's case also contributed to the development of better methods for identifying and monitoring individuals who pose a high risk for violent crime. His combination of charm, intelligence, artistic ability, and extreme violence created a template that law enforcement and mental health professionals use to identify similar individuals. His case also demonstrated the limitations of the criminal justice system in dealing with individuals who have severe personality disorders. Despite multiple arrests, convictions, and prison sentences, the system was unable to prevent him from continuing to commit increasingly serious crimes. The role of mental health treatment in preventing violent crime was also highlighted by Rodney's case. His diagnosis with antisocial personality disorder while in the military represented an early opportunity for intervention, but the lack of effective treatment options at that time meant that his underlying psychological problems were never addressed. Modern understanding of personality disorders and treatment options has advanced significantly since the 1960s, but Rodney's case serves as a reminder of the challenges involved in treating individuals who lack empathy and show no genuine desire to change their behavior. The extreme length of time between Rodney's crimes and his final conviction also raised questions about the effectiveness of the death penalty as a deterrent and punishment. He spent over 40 years on death row, during which time he continued to consume significant resources through appeals and legal proceedings while never being executed. His death from natural causes while still appealing his convictions meant that the death penalty was never actually carried out, raising questions about whether life imprisonment without parole might be a more effective and economical approach to dealing with the most serious criminals. The case also demonstrated the importance of preserving physical evidence and biological samples from crime scenes, even when cases appear to be unsolvable with current technology. The DNA evidence that eventually linked Rodney to multiple murders was only possible because investigators had preserved samples from crime scenes decades earlier. This lesson has influenced modern law enforcement practices, with many agencies now maintaining extensive evidence storage facilities and protocols for preserving biological samples that might become useful as forensic technology continues to advance. The international interest in Rodney's case, including documentaries and news coverage in countries around the world, also highlighted how serial murder cases can transcend national boundaries and contribute to global understanding of criminal behavior patterns. His case has been studied by law enforcement agencies, psychologists, and criminologists internationally, contributing to the development of better methods for preventing, investigating, and prosecuting serial crimes worldwide. The cultural impact of Rodney's case has also been significant, inspiring not only true crime documentaries and books, but also fictional works that explore themes of hidden evil, the the danger of superficial charm, and the importance of trusting one's instincts about people. The phrase dating game killer has become part of American popular culture, representing the concept of how dangerous individuals can hide behind facades of normalcy and even celebrity. His case is frequently cited in discussions about personal safety, background checks, and the importance of being aware of potential dangers in seemingly safe social situations. For the study of serial murder, Rodney's case provided valuable data about the escalation patterns, geographic mobility, and victim selection methods used by organized serial killers. His ability to successfully evade capture for over a decade while committing crimes in multiple states demonstrated the challenges faced by law enforcement in an era before modern communication and forensic technology. His use of multiple aliases and false identities also influenced the development of better methods for tracking individuals across jurisdictional boundaries and maintaining accurate records of criminal histories and identity changes. The discovery that Rodney had been living under false identities while attending universities and working in jobs that gave him access to children highlighted the importance of thorough background checks for positions involving vulnerable populations. Modern employment practices, particularly in education, childcare, and youth services, now routinely include extensive criminal background checks and ongoing monitoring, influenced in part by recognition of how predators like Rodney had successfully infiltrated these environments in the past. The case also contributed to improvements in sex offender registration and monitoring systems. Rodney's ability to move between states and commit additional crimes while registered as a sex offender demonstrated the limitations of early registration systems and the need for better tracking and supervision of high-risk offenders. Modern sex offender registration laws include more stringent reporting requirements, longer registration periods, and better communication between jurisdictions, all influenced by recognition of the failures that allowed offenders like Rodney to continue committing crimes. The role of technology in both committing and solving crimes was also highlighted by Rodney's case. His use of photography equipment to lure victims showed how technology could be misused by criminals, while the eventual use of DNA testing and computer databases to connect his crimes demonstrated how advancing technology could be a powerful tool for law enforcement. The massive collection of photographs found in his storage locker also foreshadowed modern concerns about digital privacy and the potential for technology to be used for stalking and documenting potential victims. His systematic photography of subjects over many years created a physical record similar to what might now be maintained digitally by online predators. For the field of criminal profiling, Rodney's case provided valuable insights into the behavior patterns of organized serial killers who maintain facades of normalcy while committing extreme violence. His ability to successfully present himself as a charming, artistic individual while secretly being a sadistic killer became a template for understanding how such individuals operate. His case also demonstrated the importance of looking beyond surface appearances and considering behavioral patterns, relationship histories, and responses to stress and rejection when evaluating potential threats. The warning signs were present throughout his life, but they were often overlooked because of his intelligence and superficial charm. The impact of Rodney's crimes on popular understanding of serial murder cannot be overstated. His case helped educate the public about how serial killers operate, the importance of trusting instincts about dangerous individuals, and the ways that predators can successfully hide within normal society. His story has become a cautionary tale that parents used to teach children about stranger danger, that women reference when discussing personal safety strategies, and that law enforcement agencies used to train officers about the characteristics and methods of serial predators. The decades-long legal proceedings in his case also educated the public about the complexities of the death penalty system, the appeals process, and the challenges of achieving justice in cases involving multiple jurisdictions and sophisticated defendants who represent themselves. For the victims' families, the resolution of Rodney's case brought a sense of closure that had been decades in the making. While nothing could bring back their loved ones or erase the trauma they had endured, the finality of his death and the certainty that he would never hurt anyone else provided some measure of peace. The courage shown by survivors like Tali Shapiro and Morgan Rowan in speaking publicly about their experiences helped other survivors find their voices and contributed to public understanding of the long-term effects of violent crime. Their advocacy work and their friendship demonstrated the possibility of healing and resilience even after experiencing unthinkable trauma. The case also highlighted the importance of supporting victims and their families throughout lengthy legal proceedings. The repeated trials, appeals, and media coverage meant that those affected by Rodney's crimes had to relive their trauma multiple times over several decades. Modern victim services programs include better preparation for lengthy legal processes, ongoing counseling and support services, and advocacy to protect victims' rights throughout the criminal justice process. These improvements were influenced by recognition of the additional trauma that victims and families can experience during complex legal proceedings. The international attention that Rodney's case received also contributed to global efforts to improve communication and cooperation between law enforcement agencies in different countries. Serial killers who cross national boundaries present unique challenges that require international cooperation to effectively investigate and prosecute. His case influenced the development of international databases for tracking criminal activity, sharing information about dangerous individuals, and coordinating investigations that span multiple countries. These systems have become increasingly important as travel and communication technology make it easier for criminals to operate across international boundaries. The psychological research generated by Rodney's case has also contributed to better understanding of the factors that contribute to the development of serial killers. His combination of childhood trauma, personality disorders, intelligence, and artistic ability created a unique profile that researchers continue to study. This research has influenced the development of early intervention programs designed to identify and help children who have experienced severe trauma before they develop into violent adults. While not all trauma survivors become criminals, early intervention can significantly improve outcomes and reduce the risk of future violence. The case also demonstrated the importance of recognizing and properly treating personality disorders, particularly antisocial personality disorder. Rodney's diagnosis in the military represented an early opportunity for intervention, but the lack of effective treatment options at that time meant that his condition went untreated. Modern understanding of personality disorders includes better treatment approaches, though individuals with antisocial personality disorder remain among the most challenging to treat effectively. Rodney's case continues to inform research into more effective interventions for individuals with these conditions. The media coverage of Rodney's case also influenced how serial murder cases are reported and discussed in popular culture. The sensational aspects of his story, particularly his appearance on the dating game, created intense public interest that had to be balanced with respect for his victims and their families. Modern media coverage of serial murder cases generally includes more consideration of the impact on victims and families, influenced in part by recognition of how extensive coverage can create additional trauma for those already suffering from violent crime. The case also highlighted the importance of protecting the privacy and dignity of crime victims while still providing the public with information necessary for safety and criminal justice purposes. The decision to release some of Rodney's photographs to help identify potential victims was controversial but ultimately successful in advancing the investigation. This balance between public safety, criminal investigation needs, and victim privacy continues to be a challenge in high-profile cases, with Rodney's case serving as an important precedent for how these competing interests can be managed. For the field of criminology, Rodney's case provided valuable data about the geographic and temporal patterns of serial murder. His crimes spanned multiple states and occurred over more than a decade, providing researchers with information about how serial killers adapt their methods and selection criteria over time. His case also demonstrated the importance of considering all forms of evidence, including behavioral patterns, witness testimony, and physical evidence, when investigating serial crimes. The combination of different types of evidence was crucial in ultimately connecting him to multiple murders and achieving convictions. The storage locker full of photographs that Rodney maintained also provided unprecedented insight into how some serial killers document and memorialize their crimes. This discovery influenced law enforcement training about what types of evidence to look for when investigating suspected serial killers. Modern investigators now routinely search for collections of photographs, recordings, or other materials that suspects might use to document their interactions with victims or potential victims. This type of evidence can be crucial in establishing patterns of behavior and connecting suspects to multiple crimes. The case also influenced the development of better methods for managing and analyzing large amounts of evidence in complex criminal cases. The hundreds of photographs and other materials found in Rodney's storage locker required extensive analysis and comparison with missing person cases across multiple jurisdictions. Modern evidence management systems include better methods for digitizing, cataloging, and cross-referencing evidence from multiple crime scenes and jurisdictions. These systems were developed partly in response to the challenges revealed by cases like Rodney's. The impact of Rodney's case on victim advocacy cannot be overstated. The courage shown by his survivors in testifying against him and speaking publicly about their experiences helped establish the importance of victim voices in criminal proceedings and public policy discussions. Their advocacy work contributed to improvements in victim services, changes in legal procedures to better protect victims during trials, and increased public awareness of the long-term effects of violent crime on survivors and families. The case also demonstrated the importance of providing victims with information about legal proceedings and involving them in decisions about plea bargains and sentencing. The decades-long legal process in Rodney's case meant that victims and families had to endure uncertainty and repeated trauma as the case moved through the courts. Modern victim rights laws include provisions for keeping victims informed about legal proceedings, providing them with opportunities to participate in plea negotiations, and ensuring that their voices are heard during sentencing phases of trials. The international scholarly interest in Rodney's case has also contributed to academic understanding of serial murder and violent crime. His case has been the subject of numerous research studies, academic papers, and scholarly analyses that have advanced the field of criminology. This academic attention has helped establish better theoretical frameworks for understanding serial murder, improved methods for investigating these crimes, and more effective approaches to preventing and treating the psychological conditions that can lead to violent behavior. The case has also been used extensively in law enforcement training programs around the world. The complexity of the investigation, the challenges of connecting crimes across multiple jurisdictions, and the importance of preserving evidence for future analysis make it an ideal case study for training purposes. Police academies, FBI training programs, and international law enforcement agencies continue to use Rodney's case to teach investigators about the methods used by serial killers, the importance of interagency cooperation, and the value of advancing forensic technology in solving complex crimes. The cultural legacy of Rodney's case extends beyond its impact on law enforcement and criminal justice. His story has become part of American cultural consciousness, representing the concept that evil can hide behind a facade of charm and normalcy. The phrase dating game killer has entered common usage as a way to describe individuals who present themselves as appealing or harmless while harboring dangerous intentions. This cultural shorthand helps people communicate about the importance of being cautious and trusting their instincts about others. The case has also influenced popular entertainment, inspiring numerous books, documentaries, television shows, and films that explore themes of hidden evil, the psychology of serial killers, and the importance of victim advocacy. These cultural products help keep the memory of his victims alive while educating the public about criminal behavior patterns. For the families of Rodney's victims, his death in 2021 marked the end of a chapter that had defined their lives for decades. While they could never recover what they had lost, they could finally have certainty that justice had been served and that he would never harm anyone else. The strength and resilience shown by these families throughout the decades-long legal process served as an inspiration to other families facing similar tragedies. Their advocacy work and their commitment to seeing justice served helped establish important precedents for victim rights and criminal justice procedures. Their stories also highlighted the importance of community support for families affected by violent crime. The networks of support that developed around the victims' families provided crucial assistance during the most difficult periods of their lives and demonstrated the power of community solidarity in the face of tragedy. The case of Rodney Alcala ultimately serves as both a cautionary tale about the dangers that can lurk beneath superficial charm and a testament to the persistence of those who work to achieve justice for victims of violent crime. His death in 2021 closed the final chapter of a case that had spanned over 50 years and affected countless lives. While Rodney took many secrets to his grave and many questions about his crimes will never be answered, his case contributed significantly to improvements in law enforcement, victim services, criminal justice procedures, and public awareness of personal safety issues. The legacy of his victims lives on through these improvements and through the ongoing work of those who continue to fight for justice and prevention of violent crime. The story of Rodney Alcala reminds us that evil can indeed hide behind a charming smile and that vigilance, intuition, and community cooperation are essential tools for protecting ourselves and others from those who would do harm. It also demonstrates that even in the darkest circumstances, there can be survivors who find the strength to rebuild their lives and help others, and that justice